What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 6, I believe, of the OYL podcast, and I'm here with the one and only Christine Wilson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So excited to have Christine here. She specifically focuses on women's health. I'm gonna let her tell you more about her, how she views that, and how she does that. But one of the cool things at our gym is largely women. And there's a lot of things that we see with women's health that sometimes don't get addressed or they get overlooked in the fitness world. And that's always been important to Christine. She'll tell you a little bit about herself and all that. But it's cool. We wanted people to really understand like whether we talk about women's health, pelvic floor, pregnancy, postpartum, whatever those words that we're talking about, how this is a really wide-reaching thing. And a lot of these things that we'll talk about today, like some women are just not aware. Like they're just not aware that these are things. And so we as a gym really want to make people more aware of these things so that they can do something about it. So Christine, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. And so that means that I'm a coach for athletes of all different sports, including CrossFit. But I specialize in pelvic floor and women's health. It's what I'm passionate about. I have my own story of just pelvic floor health pre-kids and looking into that world, and then obviously pregnancy and postpartum. And so, I'm just really passionate about helping women find a better way to live.
Yeah, and she does that. She has a class that is really growing. It's only been around a little while, and it's growing. But what we find as coaches and just as a gym is sometimes we start talking about this stuff. Like I'll sit down in intros with people and be like, yeah, we have a pelvic floor and pregnancy postpartum coach here. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we want to take care of you in that. So tell us, what I want to start with is just tell us, like when you talk about like women's health, pelvic floor, pregnancy, postpartum, like what are like the actual things that you want to help women with? Like what are some of the problems they might see and the way you like to address those things?
I believe that there is just so much about the women's health that we just don't talk about as women. I think we'll get into it about just like going to your OB. There's a lot of pelvic floor health that just isn't talked about. But in general, I think women's health there's a lot of shame around it, where we just don't talk about our bodies. We don't talk about the things that we go through. We don't talk about our menstruations, things that are naturally happening and that everyone is well aware that is happening. We don't even talk about it. And so so that makes even more so women not want to talk about their lower back pain that they're experiencing. Maybe that belly pooch that never went away after pregnancy. And we're not talking about just, hey, you need to work on your nutrition because your belly's a little big. We're talking like, hey, like there's a pooch that hasn't gone away because of your pelvic floor health. Peeing when you're jumping, pain with sex. That's something that women do not talk about. There's shame around that. And that can be fixed. And I always say, like, I want to help women live a happier and healthier life. And I mean happier because we get to jump on the trampoline with our kids. We get to run around with them. And grandkids too. We can actually enjoy sex and all those types of things that I think a lot of people just have convinced themselves that they have to live with, and they don't.
Yeah, man, that list that she just said is so common, but they're not normal, right? And we'll talk more about that later, but like part of the freedom that Christine brings to people is, hey, like we can do something about that, right? But like you mentioned, like a lot of people are ashamed to talk about these things because they feel like, well, it might be weird, or like no one wants to hear about my problem, or just like, oh, and this is another one, is people just always say like, oh, that's just how it is. Yeah, so I know that lights you up. So
yeah, I remember the first time I went to see a pelvic floor physical therapist, and I came back and I was telling this older woman, she wasn't that much older than me, honestly, telling her about what they had taught me, and I was just like in shock. And she literally went, yeah, but that's just part of being a mom. That's just part of being a woman, is peeing your pants. So I don't really care, and I'm not going to put the work in to fix it. And she literally said that to me, and I remember sitting there and just being like, okay, like if you want to live your life peeing your pants, go right ahead. Like, sure, okay, if that doesn't bother you, but there's a better way to live, And it lights me up. It fires me up pretty fast.
Yeah, man. The worst thing for anyone is a belief that's not true, right? So like if you're walking around believing that that's true, but it's not, you're walking around with a problem that you don't have to have.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
And I mean, what's cool is, and I've, interacted with some of her clients, because some of our members, like they come to my class or other classes, and like their eyes are open, right? And they're like, oh, like we can do something about this. So that's super cool. So we're going to come back to the things that people think are normal that aren't. But when you talk about the pelvic floor and restoring it, like you talked about the pooch, you talked about, the peeing in the pants, like when you talk about pelvic floor training or improving it, what are you actually talking about?
Yeah. So let's talk about the anatomy of the pelvic floor first. So
We forgot the pelvis.
Yeah, I know. I meant to bring my pelvis. So let's talk about the anatomy of the pelvic floor. So what the pelvic floor is, because it would surprise you how many people actually don't even know. They know, like, they're like, okay, a pelvic floor, it's probably down there somewhere. And then that's kind of all they know. But the pelvic floor is what I like to call like the hammock muscles that are literally holding up all of your organs and all of the important things, honestly. Like, I mean, it's truly the underside of your body. And so it extends all the way from your tailbone all the way to the front, and for men and women. And so these are obviously very important muscles because they're holding organs in. They're holding, when you're pregnant, they're holding your baby up. These are essential. And obviously those muscles are connected to other huge essential muscles. Like we're talking about our hip flexors, we're talking about our glutes, we're talking about our core. And so, yeah, the pelvic floor is just, I could talk about it all day long, is just so important to our entire body in the way that we're made.
Yeah, and here's an example. So, like, you want to squat? Well, your pelvis is the bridge between your legs and you. So, if you have a bar on the front, on the back, overhead, a dumbbell, a kettlebell, whatever, that's a bridge.
Exactly.
Right? And so, when there's dysfunction there, there's problems, right? Yeah. So, when you start working with someone, okay, and you start working with their pelvic floor, like, because you could tell me like, hey, squeeze your abs while you squat, or like other cues, but like, what are you actually looking to change when someone, or what are the problems when someone comes in with a pelvic floor?
Yeah. So most common issues that I see in general are diastasis recti, which is that separation in the abs that maybe hasn't healed correctly after pregnancy, or people can be born with it as well. And that's men can have it as well. Peeing their pants when lifting or jumping or doing different activities. Lower back pain, as I mentioned before, that pooch, just the weakness of the core. But when people come in, I always start them with diaphragmatic breathing. So diaphragmatic breathing is just the basics of belly breathing. When you watch a newborn lay there and breathe and sleep, you're not watching their chest move up and down. You're watching their belly breathe. And so somewhere along in our adulthood, along with all the other bad habits that we all pick up, we have started breathing with our chest and our shoulders. And so a lot of times that's very constricting. I always talk about the lactic acid buildup that it adds, because that's something I really dealt with. And I didn't even know that the lactic acid in my shoulders was related to my pelvic floor, right? Like I would work out and I'd always be like, my shoulders hurt so bad afterwards. And we didn't do shoulder work, It was all legs.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. But that's the basics of like what I start is like, let's learn how to breathe correctly. We always talk about this analogy of like a soda can or a water bottle. Like there is this natural, or an unopened soda can or water bottle. There is this natural pressure that is built up in our bodies like a soda can or water bottle. And if I were to just shove a pin in a soda can, what would happen? A hole would be created, and that pressure would push out the soda or sparkling water. Waterloo to be exact, LaCroix. But when you do that, that's the natural pressure in our bodies. And so when we have holes in our bodies, which could be that diastasis, that separation in our abs, or the natural holes that we all have at the bottom of our body, that's where that pressure is coming out. And so when we learn to breathe correctly, we're teaching ourselves to take that natural pressure out of our body and move it out of our mouth and out of the healthy way that it's supposed to come out. And a lot of times learning the basics of breathing and learning how to control that core and that breath solves a lot of issues, way more than you would think.
Yeah, and I've watched her class and how she runs it. Like they start with breathing because it's a pattern thing, right? Like we do it all the time without. It's an involuntary action most of the time. So it takes effort to like actually think about breathing.
Yeah.
So, but most of the time you're breathing. I hope you are. And so you're repeating a certain pattern, and if you don't change that, you get kind of the same results. So she talked about some of the problems and stuff. let's talk about pregnancy and postpartum with this too, right? Because yeah, pelvic floor, something's going on. Like we've got lack of control, or we have other ways the pressure's coming out. Like we have problems with that. But like pregnancy, postpartum, like when someone becomes pregnant or someone, is postpartum, like what are some of the things that, that does to the pelvic floor?
Yeah. I mean, I think if we all think logically, like now we know where the pelvic floor is. I mean, think about it. You literally have a human growing on top of your pelvic floor, essentially. And that doesn't even include your uterus growing and the placenta. And like, I mean, that's a lot of extra weight that is being pushed down on your pelvic floor. And specifically for athletes of any sports, whether you're a runner or a CrossFitter or, you do anything else, there's going to be movements where you're moving, and that's a lot of pressure jolting around down on your pelvic floor. It's impactful, right? And so it's a lot of times, like what pregnancy is doing is we're trying to take care of your pelvic floor during pregnancy, because one, we all know what is at the end of pregnancy, right? Like it's child labor. Mm-hmm. And so that baby's got to get out one way or another. And even if you have a C-section, that's still a lot of pressure on your pelvic floor during the entire pregnancy. And most times women, in generic terms, like most times there is some kind of dilation of some sort, even if you were to have a C-section. Sometimes there's not, so it's not always. But, your cervix is dilating. That is opening up your pelvic floor, So even if you have a C-section, there's still a lot of things that are impactful on that pelvic floor. And postpartum, I mean, a huge chunk of it is really taking care of those muscles, post-birth. If you did have a vaginal birth, that's a lot. That's a lot on that area. If you had a C-section, that's a lot on that area. I mean, I specifically had a C-section and a VBAC, and that was a lot of pressure and a lot of hard work on my pelvic floor.
Yeah, and VBAC is a vaginal birth after C-section. So that's like you've had the incision and baby removed once, and then next baby go, vaginal birth. And both of those types, I mean, well, a C-section too, like you're also creating a space in the abdominal wall too. So like when we talk, some people talk about, well, it's surgical, they stitch it up. But no, like you made a change.
Yeah, I mean, with C-sections, there's so much damage in your nerves, in your tissue and scar tissue. I mean, there's just really is. I mean, it's a surgery. I mean, people don't love to hear this, but you have to treat pregnancy and postpartum like an injury, like you would any injury. And I mean that in a positive way, really. Like there's modifications for everything, But postpartum, I mean, I have many women come to me about that 7, 8, 9 months mark postpartum after a C-section, and they're like, I'm starting to feel pain near my C-section scar. And I mean, it takes that long for nerves to start, firing, like, I mean, sometimes they're growing back together, sometimes they're dead. It is, you know what I mean? Like, you just don't know. Every human's different. And so even that alone is very difficult towards a sport, trying to be able to turn those muscles on when somebody literally went in and sliced everything.
Was it 11 layers of tissue? Or 7 or 11, or it's a
7,
lot.
7, 9, 11, something like that. It's
Dr.
an odd
Brooke
number.
Miller has a cool image of that. But she said treat pregnancy as an injury. Like we were when we did the first podcast with Ryan. One of the things we talked about injury is like injury is more about creating a focus than it is about like this is a bad thing. So like a positive point of view is like, hey, if we understand an injury, then, and especially our point of view, along with Dr. Ryan Perez, is we believe the body is very strong and very capable. But in lieu of that, we need to make sure that if there is an injury, we create the best possible scenario to get back to, optimal levels of strength based on whatever occurred, right? Yeah. So like when you think about pregnancy as an injury, that's actually when you look at the positive point of view, that's like, okay, I realized that this really major thing happened and things are different. And if I take the steps to do things properly, I'll be better off long term.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than jumping back into it.
I mean, think about what you're not ACL, Achilles. When you weren't trying to max out 8 months postpartum with that, right? Not postpartum, but post that. And I mean, that's the thing is we have so many women who come in, well, I'm 6 months postpartum. I should be able to lift this. One, there isn't a should, like, right? Like,
Yeah, right.
But it's that mindset of like, if you just got back surgery or abdominal surgery of any sort, would you be trying to max out 6 months post that? Probably not. And most doctors would tell you not to, you know, like, and so I think there's a lot of times people have this mindset of, oh, I just had a baby, I should bounce back, especially if you're doing that same sport before pregnancy and postpartum and all that kind of stuff. People have these expectations that you should just be able to bounce back. My stomach will go flat. I'll be able to lift all the same weight. And it's like, it's a journey. I mean, I'm 2 months postpartum of our last kid. And I mean, I'm finally hitting numbers that I hit before we had kids, which was 4.5 years ago, you know, like it takes time. And everyone's different for sure. 100%. Everyone's so different. And breastfeeding has a huge play into that. There's a lot of other factors. Sleep. I mean, I know that, you know, we all preach that like we need to get good nutrition and sleep. And the first year of a newborn isn't really the time that you're probably prioritizing your sleep and nutrition. It's hard, right? Like keeping a child alive is kind of the priority. Keeping yourself alive. And not that you can't do all of it, but it is hard. It's difficult. And, I think a lot of people have these expectations that I should come back from postpartum or post-delivery and be able to lift and run and do all these things perfectly. But that's kind of what I mean when I say like we have to treat it like an injury. Like let's take care of our body and make sure that these muscles are healthy and intact so that we can come back even better. Now we can hit more weight. Now it may take longer than you'd want, but it can happen.
Yeah. She mentioned my Achilles injury. My therapist, when I was doing it, he's like, look, there are stages to this because it's a very major tendon. It's a very robust tendon. It takes a lot of time to build it back up because a lot of the reason that the Achilles is really robust is because you're on your feet all the time. Yeah. So you take that away because you have surgery and you can't weight bear for a while. It gets smaller. Yeah. And so it takes time. So he told me, he's like, dude, like a year is when you can expect to be somewhere close to where you were. Not even back to, but like he's like, that would be
maybe if you nearing it.
Yeah, if you do everything properly and you set it up for, set everything up for success, right? And it's like, that gave me a really good point of view, and it made me stick to the things I knew I could do, but also what it took, and I focused on the thing for where I was at that stage, right? All right, so this is, I want to ask this question because Christine, so we have a messaging channel for the coaches at the gym, and Christine posted in of like, hey, like, just be aware, like there are people in the gym who are postpartum, but you may not know, right? And so who is postpartum?
Yeah, everyone who has been pregnant at any time. And that is you lost your babies at 4 weeks, that's you had an abortion, that's you lost your baby at 20 weeks, 30 weeks, whatever that is, because once you're pregnant, your hormones and body start changing. It may not feel as drastic or be as drastic as a 4-week pregnancy versus a full-term pregnancy, but your hormones in your body have changed.
And this was a really eye-opening thing for me because it really made me think, oh yeah, like I really don't know what someone's going through. Yeah. So as a coach, like I realized like there may have been times I was just insensitive to something and I didn't really understand the problem, right? And that's why we talk about these things, because we're like, hey, like, we want to help these people, right? Like we want people to understand these things so they're like, oh, like maybe that is why things are different. Like, because just because you didn't go full term, like you mentioned, like having like a miscarriage, like even if you only make it, maybe into the first trimester where you don't typically see large amounts of size change, dude, internally you've had a bunch of changes.
And your
that
hormones have shifted. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had clients come in and who didn't tell me at first, which of course I always ask, but some people are just uncomfortable at first to share it, but who have had miscarriages and maybe weren't married. And so you don't specifically think of it, right? Like when you meet someone new, you're just like, oh, they're a single girl, right? Like you just don't think to ask that. But it was really eye-opening to find out that like some of my clients, had miscarriages or had abortions, and like that does affect your pelvic floor. Then that affects training in general, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just the facts. Like your pelvic floor and your hormones have changed, and they change you physically, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we love those people. We want to take care of you now, like where you are now. And that's what this is about, is it's like, it's the same thing as someone who comes in the gym. They're 43 years old. They haven't worked out in 17 years. They've got high blood pressure. They're pre-diabetic. We're like, hey, I know you wish you could have started or changed, but hey, we are where we are. We want to help you right now, you know? So, okay. So, this gets into like kind of what people think's normal, not normal type of thing. But, and this is something that, you know, we are always just kind of like dumbfounded, but like, what do most people usually experience in terms of being cleared back for activity after they've had baby?
Yeah. So after you have a baby, pretty much the only clearing is, and in my experience, that you go get checked out by your OB at 6 weeks. If you've had a C-section, they might check you at 2 weeks to check your incision. And at 6 weeks, they look at you and they say, all right, your cervix is closed. You're good to go. And that's it. I've had friends who literally told me, yeah, on the way out the door, my doctor said, just let me know if sex is painful. And that was it. And she's like, I haven't even had sex. Like, yeah, like I just got cleared. Like, of course I don't know if sex is painful. And yeah, there's not in the normal OB situation. This it can happen other places where, you know, you get more information, but and most of the time it's just all right, let me know. Good luck.
What a final message to go out.
Yeah.
Just let me know.
And people say this all the time. They're like, think about how many checkups we get during pregnancy. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but let's say at least 20. Like it's a lot, right? And postpartum, what do we get? One. And thankfully, I had a great OBGYN who was like, I had to bring it up still, but the second I said, hey, I would like to go to pelvic floor physical therapist, yes, 100%. And at least in the state of Texas, you know, you have to get a referral. And so getting that sign off was a big deal. I've had women say that their doctor said they wouldn't until they started seeing symptoms or issues. And so they had to go home, have sex, have it be painful, deal with other issues, and then come back and say, can I please go see a doctor now? And then they would say, okay, yeah, go ahead, you know, or whatever. Or say no, or whatever. Because they're doctors, they can do what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like, you know, it's just standard practice, right? But it's the authority of the healthcare system. So if the doctor says it, okay, I guess it's okay.
Exactly.
You know, so, and again, we talked about earlier, like we want to bring awareness to this stuff because some people just aren't aware that there are other solutions out here, like someone like Christine, pelvic floor physical therapist, understanding this stuff. But again, you go way back and it's like, well, people are like, you're a mom. This is just what it's like being a mom.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of women that I've heard tell me that their doctor said when they said, hey, sex is really painful. And they said, all right, drink a glass of wine and relax. And that's their advice for sex to not be, and use lube and wine, and good luck.
You've never told me that. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
I'm not joking. I got the amount of women that I know that have been told that, like, truly, like, just go home, relax, drink some wine, and use a lot of lube, and you'll be good. It'll get better. And it's like, that's, now, maybe it will, but what if it doesn't? Are you just going to live with that? Like, you're going to live with that pain for the rest of your life? And some women do. Some women live with it for years, and some people stop having sex and stop doing the things that they enjoy. And again, this is back to the living a happier life. There are women who literally will not jump and run around with their kids because they pee their pants so much. So you're telling me you just want to cut that part of enjoyment out of your life because of a symptom of something that we can fix fairly easily, in my opinion.
Drop the mic.
I know. I like
that's the real problem.
It really gets me fired up bad because I'm just like, I remember the moment where I looked at Mike even postpartum and just said, I cannot live this way anymore. I've got to fix this. I was like, I cannot pee my pants this many times a day anymore. You know?
That's real, man. But
yeah.
And she's telling you her frustration. Yeah. Dude, there's a lot of people that have never felt comfortable saying that out loud. Yeah. Like admitting that. And
it's hard for women. Again, it's back to the shame thing. I mean, every woman I talk to says, this is TMI, but guess what? It's not. It doesn't need to be a TMI.
You're not a special snowflake.
No, yeah. You know what? I read that in something the other day. It was like, you are not a special snowflake. Just because you deal with this does not make you special. Like, listen, there's a lot of people that deal with this kind of stuff.
There's power in knowing you're not alone.
Exactly. And so that's why, honestly, like, I think my vocabulary has changed a lot in the last year, 2 years of just like, no, I'm going to talk about it. Like, I'm going to talk about our body parts, and we're going to talk about the pain, and we're going to be open about this. Like, we've got to talk about our miscarriages. We've got to talk about what postpartum looks like, you know? Ugh, gets me fired up.
This is good, man. This is good. I wrote down the note of that clip of I'm done with this. So they go to the doctor and they just say, okay, you're cool, based on a single metric, right? Which is like the cervix closing, you know?
I mean, there might be other. I'm not an OB, but
well, it's one you're aware of, and you've gone through it, right? So you've been to 2 of those appointments, and so, like, and you know, we talk about this with using a scale. Like a scale is only as good as you can interpret it, and so that's why we like the in-body scanner, because it's your body weight, but it's also your body fat percentage. It's also your muscle mass, and it's also relative to your age and height, and so it's adding more metrics so that you have a better system for understanding, right? So, like, you know, if you go to a pelvic floor physical therapist or you come see Christine, like, they'll do an assessment. So they'll start to look at other things and be like, okay, I see some things. And that's the cool thing about preventative treatment, as opposed to drink some wine and hope it gets better, or just thinking that this is how a woman lives life. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I kind of see is, like, when you go through this whole pregnancy, postpartum thing, it's like, oh, let's keep mom and baby healthy, and as soon as baby comes, like, all attention's on the child. Yeah. Like it literally shifts. Everything. Well, and a child is like, I mean, there's a reason in the tax code they're a dependent, you know, but like, because they are dependent, but that's not taking into account the woman who's also taking care of this child and has a life. I mean, that child will grow up and most often leave the house, and it's like, well, you're still you.
And we're not even talking about mental health at this point.
Yeah,
right?
We're purely talking about physical, your anatomical health. Yeah. So I get kind of fired up about it too, because, you know, and I'm a male, but what I get fired up about is people having, like, incorrect beliefs. Is if you walk around believing you can't do something, or this is how it always is, like, the mental health part of it is, it starts affecting your relationships, how you view yourself, how you view your worth, and all of that. And we know that all of that stuff, if it's in a certain trend, like the types of things that leads to. And it's just, ladies, like, you can do something about this. But so when we say it, we're not like, oh, you're bad for not taking action. We're like, no, like, you just may not know. Exactly.
Like I said earlier, the amount of people that do not know even what the pelvic floor is would surprise you. Like, I think there's just, we don't talk about it enough. We just don't. And we don't talk about what our bodies go through as women in pregnancy, postpartum, or even trying to get pregnant, right? Like, if you're in IVF and you're doing a lot of hormones, and I mean, there's just so many pieces of that just, it affects your body. It affects everything.
And now, technically, like, we're CrossFit OYL Fitness. Christine is Bloom Women's Fitness. And, you know, and that's kind of her name. And her big thing is, like, helping women, like, you know, like, grow into this stuff, like, actually, you know, bloom, you know, and into being more fully a woman. And part of that's addressing these things, right? So let's run some down. I got this. I just spoke out of the mic. This is one of the things that I think is powerful, is, like, talking about the dynamic of training or improving the pelvic floor, but we can go back to some of the problems, because some of those are the things that people think's normal, but they're not normal. So, like, when someone comes to you, or when you think of problems, what's the number one thing that you're like, this is a problem that a lot of people accept as normal, but it's not normal?
Peeing your pants.
All right. I knew it was coming. So, okay, so incontinence, that's the fancy word, right? But
urinary incontinence.
Yeah, there you go, man. Because you can have other types of incontinence. So peeing your pants. So, like, you mentioned, like, just running around with their kids. Yeah. You know, like, what is going on when someone is peeing their pants with physical movement?
Yeah, so just like we were talking about that internal pressure, right? Where that internal pressure is just coming out the wrong way, in simple terms. That internal pressure is now coming out this way rather than coming out our mouth. And it's coming out in the version of pee. It can come out in queefs. It can come out in farts and poops for men mostly. It can for women, but mostly men. But yeah, I mean, people pee their pants while they jump rope, jumping on the trampoline, any impactful or movements. So like box jumps, even like push press, push jerks, heavy lifting overhead. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, it can happen in deadlift. It can happen in a lot of things that aren't even fully impactful, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But that internal pressure is essentially just coming out the wrong way. And so that's why that basics, that foundation, what I call foundational breathing, is so important.
Yeah. And so, she gave you the illustration earlier. So you've got like your pelvic floor, which is the bottom of the pelvis, and then mirroring it on the top is the diaphragm. And then you've got your trunk musculature all the way around.
Yeah, your transverse abdominis.
Yeah. So, also, there's a lot more to you than six-pack abs.
Yep.
Might be another day.
Yeah.
But so like whenever you go to jump and then receive your body weight, like when we talk about impact, what's happening is you go up in the air and gravity's pulling you back down to the earth. And when you make contact, you have to absorb that force.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is you've got all these things going on, and then the weak link is the pelvic floor. And so for men, it's one side, and for ladies, it's the other. So like men, it's more like, poop, fart. But women, it's peeing. And so whenever that's happening, like some people think that that's like, oh, that's just a problem that I have. It's an anatomical thing. But it's actually like and I'll let you walk through this. It's like a strength, control, stamina thing. So when someone's like, hey, I'm peeing my pants when I run, how would you say, okay, cool, let's start with this, the breathing, and then what happens next?
Yeah, so specifically with running, running and jumping are a little different than I would handle lifting. So just a little FYI. But running, a lot of times, people who usually that I have encountered that leak when they are running, a lot of times run like this. Their arms are up, their shoulders are up, everything is tense, and they're taking really short strides, right? And guess where they're breathing? Breathing through their chest, right? They're like hyperventilating almost. And I could say that because that was me. I wasn't leaking when
Christine
I was running.
was that person.
But I was not running correctly because I was breathing so short and in my chest. And so the first thing that I try to teach women, which is extremely hard for all humans, is to relax your shoulders and your hips. And I mean, in everything. I mean, when we lay down on the floor at the beginning of our Bloom classes, we lay there for 10, sometimes 15 minutes if we have the time. And I will say probably 10 different times, relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, relax your hips. We as humans hold a lot of trauma in our hips and our shoulders. And so things go on in our life and we don't even realize it, but we're clenching our jaw, we're grinding our teeth, right? Like I know for me, when I have dealt with anxiety, I would clench my jaw all night long, right? Like, and so we're talking about like the spiritual, emotional part of our bodies. Like it's huge. And that contribute to things like our pelvic floor and leaking when we're running. And so really learning to like relax and belly breathe the entire time you're running and lengthening those strides. Even just belly breathing helps you lengthen those strides. And just making sure that we're not landing hard and short and going like this, while we're running the entire time. But yeah, and the same with jumping. Like it's actually, you relax. Jumping is opposite from lifting. If I'm lifting heavy weights, I'm bracing, I'm getting ready. I'm ready for that impact of, okay, I'm cleaning 300 pounds and it's about to land on my shoulders, right? But that with jump rope, it's really, all right, I'm relaxing. I'm not holding that tension in my shoulders and my hips and my butt. Clenching my butt as hard as I can so that I don't pee. But what I'm doing is I'm actually relaxing everything, which is very hard for people to do.
Man, you hit that, dude. Emotional, spiritual, however you want to look at it. Carry a baby for 9 months. That's an emotional process for a woman. Like you have this human that's attached to you, growing. It's part of you. Then you have that baby, and then you have the carrying of a newborn, and you're going through all this stuff. And it's no surprise that you start breathing like that, right? Like you carried all this stuff for 9, 10, 11, 12 months. And then now things are different, right? So not only like the physical change of like the pelvic floor from
and your
birthing
posture.
a child, everything, right?
Yeah.
And so But the thing is, like, you could have had your last kid 12 years ago, and this stuff can still go on. So like these symptoms that she's talking about, like, we're all subject to this. Like, I remember when I first learned about breathing, I actually had a hip problem, and breathing actually fixed it because it was a lack of control at the hip. But the reason I couldn't control my hip was because I couldn't control my trunk, my pelvic floor, my diaphragm. All of a sudden, I started breathing better, and like I didn't have any pinching in my hip, and I had better range of motion.
Yeah.
Surprise, right? But she mentioned it. You like shrugging your shoulders, squeezing your butt. That's a sign that you're using that for trunk control rather than your actual trunk.
Yeah. And so John mentioned it earlier, the transverse abdominis. So like that is the deepest layer of our abdominal muscles. And so a lot of times you can see people who will have like that turtle shell abs and it looks like it's almost coming off of their body. Like you're like, how?
Yeah,
how do you get abs
extended.
that like extend? And a lot of times, sometimes they will have pelvic floor dysfunction of some sort because what they're compensating here is what they're lacking in their transverse abdominis. Like they're not using their deepest muscles there. And they're really just compensating with those abs, those front abs that, you know, the pretty abs that everybody wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, what we really want is those deep transverse abdominals to just be strong as a tree trunk.
Mm-hmm. I like the word trunk when we talk about the torso because it embodies like a oak tree, you know, like have that. And then like when you start moving, like when you're jumping, instead of doing a bunch of extra movement up here and that braking, it's coming from your lower legs, your quads, and your like that's what's actually creating the power.
Yeah.
And then I mean any movement can be extrapolated like that.
Exactly.
Another thing I learned along the way in my years of coaching is when you are chest dominant breathing, you can only get like 40 to 50% of the same amount of oxygen you can get with a diaphragmatic breath.
Yes.
Yeah, like because your lungs actually most efficiently expand down and out. They don't very efficiently expand up because that's actually like when you look at the shape of a lung, they're bigger up here, but this bottom part's what can expand a lot better. So
Yeah.
if you feel like you're out of breath,
Like if you have been trained in singing at all, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that diaphragmatic breathing. I literally had a vocal coach one time put a weight belt on my chest. Now looking back, I knew it was a weight belt. I didn't know at the time what it was. It was just funny. But it was a weight belt on my chest so that I couldn't breathe through my chest and I had to breathe through my belly and my diaphragm. And a lot of people come and they're like, well, I feel like I can't really extend it. We've got to work our diaphragm. We have to teach our diaphragm to extend that way. And so it's taken years for me to be able to really get big belly breaths. Like, I mean, I can make my belly get pretty big. Like, and it takes time to be able to learn to extend, to be able to suck in as much air as possible. Yeah. And so, I mean, it'll benefit every single part of your life.
that's why we call it training, right? Yeah. So like when someone comes in day one, like let's just say just to work out at the gym, and they squat and their squat's not perfect. That's okay. We have time. We're going to cue, correct. We're going to train, like reorient how they do that thing. And breathing's the same way. It takes time to train your brain because again, you're subconsciously breathing all the time.
Yeah.
So like just because you consciously breathe for 10 minutes one time doesn't mean it changes like it will make small progressions. But you do that, you know, a couple times a week or every day, that's when you really start to change how you breathe. So So that's, you know, pee in your pants. Let's talk about diastasis recti, because that's the other big one I think that women may have and not know if they can do anything about it or feel like they can't, or may not even know if they have it. So let's talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah. So, like I said, diastasis recti is when you have that split in the abs. So when we have a baby, our abs have to split, like they literally have to move to make room for the baby. And so it happens naturally during pregnancy. And so postpartum, we really just want to make sure that heals up correctly. Some people heals up correctly, no issues, right? But when we start putting a lot of pressure on our diastasis, even if it has healed pretty well postpartum, we want to make sure that these muscles around are strong, are tight, are ready to work. I mean, I remember the first time I snatched after pregnancy, lightweight, like I'm talking like 15 pounds potentially. I remember I had that bar overhead and I was just shivering. And I was like, I didn't know my core would feel like literal jello. And it's not like I had the strongest core pre-babies, But I didn't understand how much my body would literally just go limp after I had a baby. And so really working on that core is just so essential postpartum. Even if you don't lift weights, even if you are literally lifting your child, even if you are lifting those water bottles out of the back of your car to take inside, like that's why I personally really love CrossFit, is because this is functional fitness. Especially as a mom, my eyes have been opened so much more as to why this is called functional fitness, because it's like I have a 30-pound 2-year-old who wants me to hold him all the time. I have to bend over and pick him up, bend over and pick him up, and then I put him on his shoulders, and then like it's literally cleaning jerk all day long,
Cleaning jerking James.
Yeah, literally. and so anyway, so back to the diastasis. But so that separation, a lot of times postpartum, people just, when they don't breathe correctly, that internal pressure comes out in coning or doming. And so we just want to make sure those are healed correctly, and we're taking that pressure and making it leave our body in a healthy manner so that it's not making, one, that diastasis worse, but it's also, it's uncomfortable, right? Like, and it hurts. And when that internal pressure is building there, we're most likely peeing our pants as well.
Yeah, and it can be an outward symptom of lack of TA, transverse abdominis, because then all you have is this to use.
Yeah.
And then it's already been moved. And so you're putting more pressure on an area that's already moving. But when you start to work some of this stuff, you can see a reduction in it.
Yeah. I had a woman very recently who she signed up with 8 sessions with me, and she had a 4-finger diastasis. So 4-finger width, like pretty wide. And that was probably the worst that I've seen personally, just in my training. She didn't do CrossFit before, did nothing. She came in 6 weeks in. I was like, oh, let me just check your diastasis. Like, I don't even know what led me to check it then, because it really wasn't really thinking about it. And it went down to 2 fingers in 6 weeks.
That's legit. Like, I hope you guys hear that.
7 sessions, 6 weeks, it went down from 4-finger diastasis to 2. And she had already, like, she was losing weight again. Like, she was like, I feel so good. Like, I'm moving. Like, and we're talking about strictly core, glute, and hip work. Like, that all focused in on her and what her body needed, and making sure that we're not doing movements that are making you cone and dome, but instead we're finding modifications to strengthen that transverse abdominis so that those muscles start getting stronger and getting closer.
And back to the doctor assessment.
Yeah.
After you have a baby, none of this is addressed.
Yeah.
Like, all this stuff we're talking about, these are things that someone like Christine can check very quickly and get an idea of, and then also set a path for training. And a lot of times this training, whether it's reducing the DR or decreasing incontinence or whatever, like, again, those are symptoms, but if we see improvements in those, what do we see? We're actually seeing a holistic improvement in mom, in the trunk control, and that's usually indicative of, now we're not doctors, so we can't say this like with any medical jargon, but that's indicative of you healing well, right? So if these things are going back to normal, which is, because again, peeing your pants is not normal, it's just accepted as normal. But as we move back towards those things not happening, that's a very good indication. Like, hey, like, I'm sure when you saw that the DR went down from 4 to 2, like, that's a very significant change. But you're like, hey, this is working.
She also had that pooch that I'm talking about, and when I talk about a pooch, like I said earlier, I'm not talking about nutrition. I'm not talking about anything like that. It truly looks like pelvic floor dysfunction pooch is like, it truly almost like hangs off your body. Like, it's truly just like this piece that's just like, hey, I don't know where to go. Like, all my muscles are tired and I don't know where to be put back. And her pooch literally started going away. I mean, like, truly probably like half its size. Like, I'm not even trying to exaggerate. Like, it was insane. I hadn't even checked. I just didn't really think twice about it until like the end of the sessions. I was going to check again. But the fact that in 6 weeks, her pooch was getting smaller and her diastasis had halved its size. That's insane.
Yeah. And so, like, that's what's really cool about this. I've watched this over the years, and, Christine going through her pregnancies and, just her developing as a coach, and then us seeing these changes. And like, it's really wild to me that, there's so many people that, like, they don't know they can do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and like she said earlier, like, if you want to go around living like that's normal, that's cool. But like, you can't do something about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
it's just really, it just blows my mind. Like even like some of the stuff we're talking about, like her and I talk quite a bit, but like getting in the details of this, I've got one more thing that I want to really get to. And this is just kind of something that I hear people pop up, but like, so we talk about the incontinence, we talk about the DR, there's other things like organ prolapse and other things, but one of the questions that, and this is really for you as the coach, right? So someone comes to you and they're interested, they'll ask a question that sounds like something like this is, how long after baby will I be back to where I was? And how do you, the reason I want you to talk about this is I want you to talk about how do you coach someone through understanding what to expect after pregnancy? And like, how do you set expectations for that?
Yeah. Pregnancy and postpartum is so much of a mental, not game, but game, the same as physical. Like it really is. Like it's getting in the right mindset of understanding. Cara Saunders recently said this in one of her YouTube vlogs. She was like, my priority is not of an athlete right now. My priority is taking care of my baby. They went through some kind of medical issues, and she's like, I really realized that like my priority, I am pregnant now. My priority is to create a healthy baby, do everything I can to enrich this baby's life while they're in me, and afterwards, obviously. But, and I think that is so hard for women because we want to stay skinny. We want to stay thin. We don't want to get bloated. We don't want to look pregnant when we're pregnant. We want to be that woman that's 6 foot and only looks like she has a basketball in her shirt. Like we all want that, but we're all built differently. We all have different genetics. We all do different activities. And so it's a lot of a mental game with pregnancy and postpartum. And, the reality is people get really annoyed by this, but every woman is different. And again, that's because we're built different. We were created to be different.
If you didn't say this, I was going to ask, but like, yeah, every pregnancy is different.
Every pregnancy is very different. I heard someone say the other day, they're like, you were not made to look like your 16-year-old self. Because, right, women are so hard on our bodies. We're like, well, I should look like I didn't have a baby. Why? Why should you look like you didn't have it? Who told you that? Nobody? Okay. But, I mean, postpartum, really, if someone came to me and they're like, when am I going to be hitting the weights? Because honestly, I probably asked somebody that too when I was postpartum with Maddie. I probably was like, when am I going to hit that 320-pound deadlift again? And somebody was probably like, yo, chill, girl. Like, this is not a requirement. But, if you just wanted a straight answer, I'd tell you, look, you don't need to be even attempting your maxes until postpartum. Like, I would be telling you, like, I wouldn't even worry about it. But again, I mentioned this earlier. We're talking about breastfeeding. Like, that makes a big difference in your hormones and just your body in general. And obviously calories, you're burning calories and all that kind of stuff. And so, but that is the hardest part of just like postpartum. Your priority is not to hit all the numbers that you used to hit. Your priority is to have a healthy body, have a healthy soul, and to grow into the mom and the human that you're created to be. And like, that's why I'm so passionate about Bloom, because at first I really hated the name Bloom because I thought it was really, really corny, but it's grown on me a lot. That the fact that it's like, the reason I created Bloom is because women just do not understand that, or women should understand that we are created to be different. Just because you've had a baby does not mean you have to be the same old person. Pregnancy, postpartum, motherhood, becoming a wife, all of these seasons of life are supposed to change you. They're supposed to change you physically, mentally, spiritually. And that's why you're supposed to become the woman that you were created to live a happy life and a healthy life. And I really am just passionate about helping women understand that you can do both. You can be healthy and happy and be different and change and grow.
Man, I'm crying over here. It's so true though. Like, so many people are in a trap of their own mind. Yeah. And we talked about it earlier, but like, we're talking about the physical stuff, but you let this stuff go on, like you don't have sex anymore. You have all this, you start having mental, emotional problems, right? Yeah. Like you end up being in a prison, right? Like inside of you. and then you feel like there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, like if you don't want to have sex, if you hate your body, do you really think that that's helping your marriage?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just speak plainly.
Yeah.
Like if you hate yourself, you really think that he's gonna love you, or
Mm-hmm.
not love you, not hate you, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's not nurturing your marriage. It's not nurturing your relationships by you. And I say that as somebody who very much so used to absolutely hate themselves, you know, like it does not serve any relationship you're in. If you are living a life of unhappiness, unhealthiness, and not being who you were created to be. And honestly, peeing your pants every day does not allow you to be who you're created to be. When you have to stop every 2 hours because your pants are wet, it's really unfortunate.
Man, I'm crying over here, dude. But for real, like, you do that every day?
Yeah.
Where are you in 5 years? You know, and I always like to, when I do intros, just when someone's like interested in working out at the gym, you know, I want to lose this weight, I want to do this. You know, we start talking and we really get down to it. And I'm like, I really ask the question. I'm like, well, okay, that's okay if you want that result. But like, you know, I talk about you want that result. And then they're like, well, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm like, well, what's going to happen if you don't change in 5 years?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what this is about. Is like, you know, you guys, all you ladies listening and fellas, but really ladies, like you can do something about this stuff. Like you don't have to live like that. That's why Bloom exists. That's why we do this. That's why we're like excited to see where it goes. And man, thanks for sharing that, Christine. That was like, that's the real stuff, man. We're gonna wrap up here. Where can people find you, Christine?
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram at Bloom Women's Fitness, or my website, bloomwomensfitness.com.
And then the last thing is, what would you like to say in closing? We just had this awesome conversation. We, you know, shared some emotion. We talked about things that we're passionate about, but what's the last thing you would like to say?
Yeah, I think in general, I think it's, don't be afraid to reach out for help. And I know that's, you know, we could go into mental health with that, but I think in general with physical health, it's like if you are unhappy with anything that you feel like you're experiencing, pelvic floor wise, physical health, like seek out help, seek that accountability. A lot of the women that I talk to say, honestly, I know I could probably do your one-on-ones. Like everything we do, I could probably do at home, but I won't because I don't have that accountability. You know, seek out accountability, you know, seek that help. But, you know, you don't have to live with negative symptoms, whether even if you haven't even had kids, whether you're a guy, you haven't had kids, or you are pregnant postpartum. You don't have to live with those negative symptoms.
Let's go, man. You don't have to do it. We're going to end it right there, guys. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah,
Thanks so
thank you.
much. That was awesome. Probably have you on again in the future. So awesome, guys. You know, follow us, subscribe on YouTube, listen on Apple, Spotify. Drop us a review if you can. That always helps us out. So we'll see you guys later.